Welcome to the Nordic Mythology Podcast. I'm Daniel Pharaoh, co-owner of the company Horns of Odin, and I'm joined, as always, by Dr. Mathias Nordvig.
Hello, everybody. So this time we're not talking with anybody. We're not interviewing anyone. We are talking about different subjects that are important to us and, have been part of our lives lately. So first, we're going to talk about a little incident that Dan had, and then we're going to talk about which one was it again that you wanted to talk about? The Scandinavia thing. Is Iceland part of Scandinavia?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's going to be an interesting conversation. And finally, we're going to talk about what is Odinism and why are people saying that they are Odinists?
I think in this episode we're going to upset the left, the right, and everybody in Scandinavia. I think we've got pretty much everybody in our crosshairs, so it might be the most controversial episode we've done so far. We might not even have a show after this one.
Yeah. We're gonna piss off everybody.
Hey, that means you're doing something right.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, no, these episodes are good fun. We get to speak about things that have been happening in the week in our lives. Maybe if some new news has popped up, or maybe it's just something that I think that I want to know, or I've seen kind of when scouring the Facebook groups, and think that something needs maybe clearing up, and hopefully enough people will hear it and we can clear up, which is hence, especially the one with the Odinist and the Odinism thing. You see a lot of people claiming that they are Odinists and maybe don't quite understand the origin of it all, which we'll get to later. But yeah, to start with, it's a bit of a different one, I guess. But it was just something that I wanted to bring up because it really riled me up, and I wanted to get your opinions on it. I sent you the video before, and anybody that does want to check it out can go over to Valhalla Training Academy, and it's my good friend Lloyd, who's been on the show before. We spoke about strength training in sort of the Viking Age. He posted a video of him doing a lift, like a weightlifting strongman lift, and it's called the zombie clean. So it's like a clean with a clean and press, apart from as you clean it to rack the bar on your shoulders, you shoot one arm forward to catch it on your shoulder. It's really unorthodox. It looks very uncomfortable, but it's a legitimate thing. It's, people are always trying to push these things to the next level. Every lift always goes from one thing to another thing and gets more and more extreme. And there's a fella, and I can't remember his name. I probably best not saying his name anyway. But he came on and started getting quite abrasive about how it looked like a Nazi salute. I was quite accusing. I felt quite accusing of Lloyd, just because he was a quote unquote Nordic style brand, that he shouldn't. I think he even said that he shouldn't do this move or should stay away from anything that might look this certain way. I sent you it to get your opinion of it, and I want to see what you thought.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I thought that it looked incredibly uncomfortable.
Oh yeah, it must be a hard thing to do.
Yeah, it must. And I mean, as somebody who has spent the last 7-8 months going to rehabilitation with a private trainer because all my joints are fucked from doing lifts like that. Well, not exactly like that, but hard, very heavy lifts over the years. I'm like impressed. So I think it's weird. I think it's really weird that somebody has a hang up like that. Okay, so the logics here, right, is that because when Lloyd does this lift, he stretches out his right hand, and his fingers are also stretched out, right? Mm-hmm. So his hand and his arm is stretched out in like the horizontal position in front of him, right, as he's rolling up the bar on the arm, right, or landing the bar on the arm. And so the logic behind this is that, okay, so that looks kind of like a Nazi salute, and so because Lloyd has a gym that's called Valhalla Training, and mixes in Viking stuff with his training brand, that then makes this problematic. Well, first of all, he's not doing a Nazi salute. Like he's lifting a bar.
Exactly.
Like,
I think one thing that frustrated me as well was that it wasn't just an off the cuff comment either. It was the guy even put in his comment, I didn't think it was what I thought it was. So I went away, researched it, saw that it was a legitimate lift, but then came back and was like, but you still shouldn't do it because it looks like a Nazi salute. But I know it's not, but it looks it. That's what I think what infuriated me was the idea that he went away, researched it, and then came back and said, I know it's not, but still don't do it because it's bad.
Yeah, no, that's absurd. Look, people get some really weird ideas, especially when they're sitting in their little chambers by themselves, looking at a blue screen, right? It's like it's the effect of the internet once again. It's like, look, most of what people are saying on social media shouldn't be said in public in the fucking first place. Like, it's the kind of stuff that you should be saying to your friend quietly while sitting somewhere, and then your friend is like, yeah, that's dumb, and then you're like, yeah, that's dumb, and then you move on, right? That's how these things should work for most of the stuff that is being posted on the internet in general, if you ask me. And this is a great example of it. It's unfortunate that all of a sudden we have like this venue for humanity to say stupid shit in such a way all the fucking time. It's like, guys, we need to turn it off. I'm sorry, we need to turn it off.
Absolutely. And I didn't want to bring it up just to shit on the guy. It's just that we spend so much time on the podcast kind of outing the racists, which there absolutely are, and they need to be outed. But you also get this opposite side, which is, I guess, the opposite to it, but it's also so far left that it creates its own issues. Because, like I tried to explain, you put this on somebody's business page, so you're automatically associating the business page with Nazis, because not everybody reads everything. They just see these trigger words and then make the links. So you put that on his business page rather than maybe messaging privately. So it just felt like a very damning thing to do when you know that it's not what it is. And whilst I'm sure his heart was in the right place, you're kind of having the negative effect, because you could put somebody off this whole being enjoyed in this community, because somebody could maybe, they just get interested in Nordic mythology in the Viking Age, and then somebody comes along and makes a comment at them from something purely innocent, and then that's it. They just go, well, fuck that. I don't want to get involved with that. I don't want to be labeled a racist. And then that's it. They're gone. There's no kind of coming back. So you kind of have to be careful on both sides of going too far to the right and too far to the left, and trying to, like, say your heart's in the right place, but you're just kind of going too extreme.
Yeah, no, but that's a really big problem with all of this, right? And not so long ago, someone messaged me about a certain YouTube account, some guy who talks on YouTube about Nordic mythology and spiritual beliefs and those kinds of things, and they were like, oh, well, this guy is like, I've heard he's a racist and a Nazi and blah blah blah. And it's like, oh wow, where did that come from? And turns out where that came from was like somebody vaguely accusing him of this in context of him saying something that was relatively stupid about the BLM movement back in the day, and then he changed his position on it anyway, and that's all good, right? So we have a guy who says something that might not be particularly smart about the Black Lives Matter movement. He then goes through a process of learning about it, changes his opinion, tells people about it, but the idea or the rumor that this person is some kind of racist or something like that is still lingering out there because of that, right? So, you know, there's definitely something really wrong in this like woke crowd or whatever we want to call it, of people who are so busy signaling that they're anti-racist, right? That they reject racists. And it's like, yeah, we understand that you do that, but you know what? You don't have to nitpick about everything in life
Yeah.
to signal to everybody that you're a perfect anti-racist. Because you know what? You probably aren't. Regardless of how fucking woke you are, you're probably still not a perfect anti-racist. Think about that for a second.
No, absolutely not. I mean, we've had it with guests on the show, and I'm not going to name any, but we've had some guests on, other than the obvious one. But it just, just normal guests that we've had on. Some people have gone, oh, well, they're racist, and when you question them about it and ask, where do you get this opinion from? Have you got any evidence to back it up? And the answer is always no. Rumors, or I heard through somebody. And it's like, well, we can't judge our based on who we bring on the show on some kind of ifs, buts, maybes. But people kind of expect you to, and sometimes get upset, and they're like, well, can't believe you had them on. And it's like, well, if you can bring us any kind of substantial evidence to suggest, then yeah, we wouldn't have somebody on. But we can't just assume, because that's not fair on somebody.
No, exactly. And I mean, there's also just that general idea of like, oh, guilty by association, right? It's like, what does that even mean? What does it even mean that, oh, because this person over here has at some point talked to some people that are considered far right or something like that, then they are tainted forever afterwards. It's like, how does that even work? Like, how do you people who think like this, I'm talking to you woke people out there, how do you expect to change the world, change these things, if you can't ever accept that people change, for instance, or if you can't accept that what is your particular idea about what racism is isn't necessarily applicable to everything and everybody at every time in this world. It's so important to consider, my friends.
That's it. It's if you don't think people are allowed to change, then what is the point of everything that you do? Because if you're out there kind of arguing with people, debating people, boycotting people, I guess, picketing, whatever it is, if you don't believe that that person is allowed the chance to change, then what is the point of doing it? There's no point, because you're there trying to do it to get them to change their mind, and hopefully they will then retrospectively look at themselves and go, okay, I was wrong. Maybe I need to go in a different direction. But if you're not going to allow them to do that, then what's the point in the whole thing anyway? You need to allow it. It's ridiculous that people aren't allowed to make mistakes when they're children. You see it so often. Somebody will say something when they were 18, and then 20 years later, it's like, how could you say that? It's like, because I was a fucking dumb kid. I didn't know any better. Like,
I was a dumb kid. I was having a bad day. There's like 500,000 reasons that people say stupid shit all the time. And does that necessarily mean that they are bad human beings? Not necessarily. That's something to consider as well.
No, nobody's perfect all the time.
Nobody's perfect, and it's really
not even me.
It's really so as somebody who is aging, by the way, has been called a boomer by people on the internet a couple of times, which apparently is like nowadays it's that slur for reactionary conservative or something like that. I think it's incredibly disturbing to see that we have like a crowd of people out there who are like 18 to 25 and think that they're well-rounded and that they figured shit out. It's like, really? You think so?
I was a fucking moron when I was 18 to 25. I mean, I'm still a moron now, but I was even more so then. Yeah. I could not be trusted to make any decisions. But to be fair, I thought I knew everything.
Exactly, right?
I
Yeah, you
just
think
didn't.
that you know everything. And I mean, I've gotten older, you know, and still a bit of an idiot, you know, like we all are as human beings. And if we maintain that we're not, we're full of shit.
Mhm. Yeah. Anybody who can't say I'm an idiot usually is full of shit. Because we
Right?
all are. Everybody's still got something to learn. You can learn something from anybody. And it doesn't matter who they are. They can be below you in the scholarly level, or they can be below you in the states level, or whatever. You know, there's always somebody who can teach you something, and everybody can teach somebody something else. And I think that's how most people should hopefully look at life, rather than ignoring certain groups of people as if they have nothing to say at all.
I agree. I agree.
And
And
there we
that's
go.
not, and that's, by the way, not an apology for racists. Racists can still go fuck themselves.
Oh yeah, of course. We're gonna get to that later on.
Yeah.
No, obviously there's no way. But even
Let me just, by the way, let me just say something about saying that people can go fuck themselves. That, by the way, is an expression of care. Because you know what, I really think that people who spend their time hating other people need a little bit of pleasure in their lives. So when I say that they should go fuck themselves, I literally mean it. Go jerk off and get busy about that instead of hating.
Mhm. But even like I've said before, I would love to have somebody who was on the far right who's then changed their ways, especially somebody who's involved in kind of this type of kind of extremism, I guess, kind of the whole Viking far right. I'd love somebody who's been there, done that, and then gone the other way, changed their mind, taken a whole new direction, and then I'd love them to come on here and speak to us and kind of explain the situation, why they got there, what made them change their mind, and give that perspective to people, because there are people who go down that path still. And I think hearing from somebody who'd been there would definitely be an interesting perspective. And people should afford second chances. Like people, everybody makes mistakes. I don't think if you go a certain path, then that's it. You cut the ties forever and say, you know, you're fucking gone. I think if you go a certain way, you have to make things right and go an equal amount to fix it. But I think everybody should be afforded those opportunities. Maybe not everyone. There are some bad people that definitely aren't, but
The
you know what
vast
I mean.
majority,
Yes.
I think.
It sucks because you have to be careful even using the word everybody. Like, I know I don't mean like everybody. Obviously, like fucking Ted Bundy doesn't deserve a second chance.
No.
Obviously. but it's like I feel uncomfortable, even though we talk about the cancel culture. I feel uncomfortable saying, "Oh, everybody deserves a second chance," because I feel like somebody will be sat there going, "Everybody." Oh, Dan says that fucking child rapists deserve a second
He's
chance.
a racist. He's a
Yeah,
racist.
yeah. It's like so I'm like clutching my chair here, like fucking hell, backtrack. Obviously, we don't mean everyone, but that's how insane it is that you feel you have to clear that up. That it's just kind of all right. Most people should deserve that second chance if they're willing to make amends for their wrongs.
Yeah, I
All right.
mean, that just like to wrap this up, there is also something to be said for a curious disconnect between the punitive systems that we already have in place, and then the mob on Facebook and other social media,
Mhm.
right? Because we have laws and we have a judicial system in most of the countries that we're talking about here, like in the UK, in the US, and in Europe, right? And so if somebody breaks the law, then they have broken the codes of society, right? That's the whole point. And so they don't people don't need to be punished for saying something stupid on the internet if they have not broken a law. Imagine that, huh? Imagine if mob justice could go fuck itself, by the way. Just the way that I described it. Because mob justice is that doesn't help anybody. We have created laws, we vote for people to create laws and so on. So we also have agency in creating laws. You don't need to take your agency out with a fucking pitchfork and a torch, you know, right? That's what we moved away from, people.
And the thing is, you don't know when you could be on the receiving end of that, because there are a lot of people that did things in the 90s that they never thought they would be in the position that in now for getting cancelled. And obviously there's some people who are super shitty, but some people have just done stuff that they deemed to be acceptable at the time, and society deemed to be acceptable at the time. But now it's completely not, and those people are getting called out for it. So you don't know what anybody could be doing something now that in 20, 30 years, society could deem to be fucking terrible. And then it could be coming back on you. So maybe just don't be a dick all the time. Just chill.
Don't be a dick. And I mean, a great example of this, you know, compare what Dave Chappelle does in his comedy now, compared to what Eddie Murphy did in his comedy back in the 80s. Right. Mm-hmm. Right now, Dave Chappelle is being called a transphobe, a homophobe, and all of these things. And I'm like, have y'all seen Raw with Eddie Murphy? Because
oh yeah,
that's some bad. Things that he says there that's that I'm like, oh, that's cringe, man.
That's bad. Yeah, it's bad. It is bad. It's bad. I feel like the time we're doing this episode, we may as well just call it "Fuck Everybody."
Yeah, fuck everybody episode. All right, shall we move on to the next subject?
We shall. Let's piss off
Scandinavians.
All right. Yeah. So I guess, is Iceland a Scandinavian country? I know if you Google it, I think technically they say not, but I think most people are like myself, I just assume that it is. So where are we at with it?
Okay. This is going to be complicated, but try to follow along. Geographically, Scandinavia is the peninsula that includes Norway and Sweden. That's a geographical concept of Scandinavia. Then you have to ask yourself, what about the cultural concept, right? Because the cultural concept of Scandinavia includes Norway, Sweden, and Denmark as a minimum, at least. And that's because the peoples in these three countries, they speak languages that, at least in principle, are mutually intelligible. They have cultures that are very similar to one another, and they can't really get away from the fact that they're just, you know, kind of the same. They love to play up the differences and be all bitchy about it, but they're kind of just the same. So that's a cultural community, and a linguistic community, a religious community. They're pretty much all Lutheran, right? And also have similar history in so many ways. And so that's where we start with the definition of Scandinavia. And then we have two outliers, one to the east and one to the west. The outlier to the east is Finland, and the outlier to the west is Iceland. Mm-hmm. And for certain reasons, the Finns are not included in Scandinavia, even though, you know, geographically is sort of like attached to Scandinavia, because linguistic reasons, typically that's the main one, because people put a lot of weight on linguistics in general as something meaningful, which is kind of bollocks. Like, language isn't that important, people, but sure, roll with it if you think so. The Finns speak a language that belongs to the Finno-Ugric language group, which is very different from the Indo-European language group, which dominates Europe. And the Germanic languages are part of the Indo-European language group. So in that sense, the Finns are then linguistically outliers from the rest of Scandinavia. But culturally and religiously, ethnically, in so many ways, I mean, come on, Finland has been part of Sweden for 700 years. That didn't have any effect on them at all, or what? So you could say that the Finns are also in so many ways very close to Scandinavia culturally and so on. So that's the east for a bit. Going to Iceland in the west, we have a culture that is derived entirely, in a modern sense at least, from Scandinavia. In so many ways, going to Iceland is like, no different than going to Norway or Denmark or Sweden. You have a language that is that belongs to the same language group as Norwegian, in particular, and by extension also Danish and Swedish. Now the Icelanders, they did a thing back in the 19th century. They had the Great Purge, where they got rid of Norwegian and Danish and Latin and German loanwords and recalibrated their grammar so that it looked more like that language in which the sagas are written. So it's sort of like a dialed back time on their own language, and that's why they nowadays claim that they speak like the Vikings. That's a construction. That's something that they made their language do. It was, taking a direction in terms of development that could have, changed it a lot, but they decided not to. They decided to basically stem that tide. And now it's changing again, by the way. One of the policies, which is kind of ridiculous at this point, is this tendency to come up with homemade words for everything. So instead of just borrowing a word from a foreign language, they translate it into existing words in their own language. And it's like, yeah, great, guys, but if you go to Reykjavik and you speak with people there, even when they're speaking Icelandic, they're throwing in a bunch of English words all the time because it's just fucking easier. So that tells you a little bit about how those language policies work in terms of like successfulness in the future. Okay, so geographically, Iceland is of course an island. Historically, it was settled by a bunch of Scandinavians and a bunch of people from the British Isles, primarily Irish and Scottish. So some Icelanders will use that history to claim that they are actually more Celtic than Scandinavian, because fuck the Norwegians and fuck the Danes, right? And then you'll have, then you have Icelanders that are more gravitating towards, oh, we're Scandinavian or Nordic or something like that, because they like the Norwegians but fuck the Danes. And then you also have some Icelanders that are like, hey, actually the Danes aren't that bad. But the fact of the matter is that Iceland became part of the Norwegian kingdom in 1262. And then in 1387, I think it was, it transferred into a conglomerate kingdom with Denmark as well. And from 1399 or 97 or 98, something around that time period, right? Because the Norwegian king had died, the Norwegian king who had married the Danish princess, Margaret I, all of this then transferred into the hands of the Danish royal house, right? Because the Danish royal house and the Norwegian royal house at that point was fused and the fucking same. That's why when the Norwegians needed a new king, when they became independent, sovereign nation in 1905, they went to the Danish royal house and picked up, what was his face? Harald? I can't remember. Some king, some brother of the Danish king at the time, and I was like, okay, you can be king in Norway now, because that's the closest you get.
I bet he was made up, because he probably never had a chance. Probably never had a chance of being king of Denmark. It's like someone coming and getting Prince Harry from us. Like he's never going to be king. William's got it in the bag.
Yeah.
So
the comparable situation would be Scotland going all independent, and then we need a royal house. Hey, Harry, you want to join? Like that's how that works, right?
Yeah, and he's like, absolutely. I was never going to get this.
Yeah. So the situation is then that from the very late 1300s and until 1944, Iceland is then part of the Danish kingdom in some capacity as a as a vassal, and then as a integrated part of the realm, and then as a recognized sovereign nation, but still under the Danish monarchy's rule and that kind of stuff, and then eventually as a sovereign nation, right? And so for about 700 years, we see Iceland also being part of some Scandinavian kingdom, right? And as I said, culturally, historically, and so on, Iceland has been part of the same cultural and processes as Denmark and Norway, intrinsically tied to the fate of that empire, right? And I'm not just saying this because I'm Danish. I'm saying this because this is historical facts. No, like, I'm a fucking hillbilly. I'm a hillbilly Dane. I'm from Jutland, and we have we have just as many colonial issues with the Copenhageners as the Norwegians and the Icelanders. So no, it's a lot more complicated than those people who will just be like, oh, there's a single national identity of whichever fucking country I'm from that has existed forever. That's not how things work, of course. So this brings us back to the subject: is Iceland part of Scandinavia, right? Because it becomes a political question in the 19th century, 20th century, and also now, to some extent at least. Because if you say yes, then you recognize this historical attachment to the Norwegian kingdom at first, and then the Danish kingdom afterwards. If you say no, then you ignore 700 years of history, right? And then you cultivate this idea that there's some kind of like specialness associated with Icelanders that was like established as a bunch of people who left Scandinavia and left the British Isles, established their own little society over there on an island, and then they sort of like just hung around with that through those 700 years, and nothing happened to their specialness. They didn't change or become something else or something like that through that time period of being part of other kingdoms and all that stuff, which is of course not possible. So if you ask me, I'd say the concept of Scandinavia as a cultural concept is broader than that little peninsula that includes only Norway and Sweden, right? Because this is something we already and fully, nobody disputes this. We recognize this when it comes to Denmark, which is a peninsula and an archipelago south of the peninsula that includes Norway and Sweden, right? So we already have a cultural concept called Scandinavia, which is broader than just Sweden and Norway. And if Denmark is part of that, then Iceland is too, and Finland is also, and Greenland also to an extent.
Yeah, I would always would have considered Denmark, even by landmass. I would have just said that those were the three Scandinavian countries. I never would have thought it was only Norway and Sweden.
No, but there are some Norwegians and Swedes who say that sometimes. The point is, though, that everything is a construction. Everything is a construction. It's something we come up with to talk about something, right? And then you can use those constructions to be inclusive or exclusive. Now, the Scandinavians, all of them, also the Icelanders and the Greenlanders and the Finns and so on, actually use another term that we have all come together to sort of like accept as a more inclusive term, and that is, we call it the Nordic region, right? Yeah. Norden in Scandinavian. Oh yeah, we have the Sweden a chat going like fellow Scandinavia. Oh Norden. Yeah, okay.
But yeah, what about the Faroe Islands?
Well, the Faroe Islands are part of all of this too, right? They're still part of the Danish kingdom.
Don't forget the Faroes.
The point is that if you use the term Nordic to describe this whole region, then you circumvent the complicated issues of using Scandinavia as a point of reference. You also manage to avoid getting too specific about ethnicities and languages. You can be more inclusive. You can be inclusive in terms of the fact that there are the Sami who live across the borders of Finland, Sweden, and Norway as well, and are an indigenous group in northern Scandinavia. You can be inclusive about Inuit in Greenland as well, who are culturally and linguistically at this point very tied to Scandinavia, but also have their own North American indigenous identity, right? Mm-hmm. And you can easily talk about commonalities without having to go into the complicated and sometimes painful historical issues that are involved here as well, because people, of course, also have emotions tied up to this, right?
Mm-hmm. Do you think that on the whole, I guess Icelanders would class themselves as Scandinavian or not? Because I guess them calling themselves Scandinavian would then have that tie with Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, I guess, rather than independent nation. Or would they prefer to be separate?
I think it really comes down to who you talk to, because I have encountered all attitudes, honestly. Mm-hmm. Okay. I have encountered people who very much reject any idea of being associated with mainland Scandinavia. I have encountered people who purposefully beef up the the geographical fact that Iceland is like situated right between the North American plate and the European plate, right? In terms of tectonics. Mm-hmm. So that's why you have the Mid-Atlantic Ridge going right through Iceland, right? On the western side of it, you're in North America geographically, right? Mm-hmm.
If only it was a little bit lower down, so it was nice and warm. If it was just like south a bit.
You want it to be a tropical island now?
Yeah, imagine, because if it was south a little bit, I feel like it would be a really good stopping off point. I mean, it is a good stopping off point between Europe and North America anyway, but it is cold. Really fucking cold.
Well, you're also, from England, and
we just do wet.
I mean, we do cold. You guys as well. Just have wet weather.
It's predominantly just wet.
I like it. I like the temperature in Iceland. It's nice and comfortable, in my opinion.
Personally, I prefer cold. I don't like hot weather. I'm not one to go and sit on a beach. But I feel like if it was south and really nice and warm, it would be good for trade links, maybe, or maybe not now. Maybe in the past, it would have been a good place for the ships to stop over on the way between the two continents.
Yeah. So,
maybe.
Yes. I don't know how we got down this alternative geography rabbit hole, but
it's the way my mind works sometimes. I apologize.
No, it's fine. I mean, I was like, I was having ideas about Lost Atlantis and that kind of stuff when you were talking about this.
That's what happens when I buy a decanter and keep the whiskey next to the chair.
There you go. Yeah, Frederick is saying tropical Iceland. I think tropical Iceland is Hawaii. Right?
Yeah, that's probably the close. Yeah, I think you're probably right there.
Although in terms of volcanology, they're actually very different types of places. Anyway, going back to the subject about like whether or not Iceland can be said to be Scandinavian or not, right? There's some important historical markers that separates Iceland from Scandinavia. And one of them is the establishment of the Icelandic Republic. That was a very intentional, modern move to distance Iceland from the monarchies in Scandinavia. Consider that Norway, for instance, didn't have the same or didn't go the same direction. Not because the Norwegians didn't have the conversation, or heated argument could also be a way to put it, about whether or not they should have a republic instead of a kingdom, or a constitutional kingdom. And that was also, by the way, a conversation in Sweden for a while. There was actually a very early republic in Sweden for a bit, or parliamentary situation would probably describe it a little better. Kind of similar to England, wasn't it? Didn't you guys have like that guy that you all hate, Cromwell or whatever? Wasn't that
Oliver Cromwell?
Yeah,
I don't think everyone hated him. He brought down the royalists.
Yeah. Okay, it
was the parliamentarians and the royalists, and they had a little civil war.
Little spat.
But I think on the whole, Oliver Cromwell was the good guy, if there was a good guy in it, because he was for parliament. He was for, I guess, a democracy rather than someone said, hell no, I don't. I'm going to shut up. I feel like I've upset so many people already.
I just love the fact that it looks like I've stuck my hand into the fifth bee's nest for today already.
Oh, Shan's gonna have a fucking headache editing this one.
Okay, what we see is, of course, that politically Iceland distances itself from mainland Scandinavia by creating a republic, instead of being like, oh, should we be attached to some kind of monarchy or whatever, right? So what you also see is, of course, these aspects of world politics going into the conceptions of what it means to be Icelandic, and whether or not Icelandic is something that attaches itself to Northern Europe or to Northern America, right? In terms of creating a republic, what we see a lot is an Icelandic sentiment that, oh, we belong to cool North Atlantic republics like, the Americans, right? So there's also, in the construction of contemporary Icelandic identity, been a lot of influx from America. And that's also why Icelanders love to talk about how they are the first republic in the world, which they weren't. This idea that the Vikings who came over from Norway, they established a quote unquote republic with General Assembly and all that stuff. That wasn't what it was. It was sort of like a theocratic oligarchy. But when you get on Iceland there and you see that nice little video that plays in front of you and on the screen, they will usually tell you something about how it was the first democracy in the world. And that's sort of like a modern interpretation of history to basically claim a certain special Icelandicness that is detached from mainland Scandinavia. It's an Icelandicness that doesn't support the idea of monarchy as it is otherwise, attached completely to Danish identity and to Norwegian identity. So
I remember when I went to Iceland, and I was so excited to send you all these things that I'd learned over there. I send you a bunch of messages, and you just was like, "No, that's wrong. That's wrong. That's not true. Nope." And I was like, "What? No, it's on the wall when I walk down the airport. What do you mean it's not true?"
Yeah, no, it's at best it's an interpretation. At worst, it's a straight up lie, But all countries have lies about themselves, like that. It's standard, and that's what nationalism is. Nationalism, right? That's basically just a public lie about who we are. Because at best, nationalism reduces your existence as a human being to something that is defined by these weird historical processes that happened in a territory that you happen to have been born in, right? That's really all it is. So, we Danes, we have a bunch of lies about how the Germans have been evil to us throughout history, right? and it's just not fucking true. Like, but it's a great thing to keep talking about, because we got our asses kicked in 1864, where they took half of the fucking country.
And I think it's just easy as well. You kind of round things up into nice little bite-sized pieces, because when you when you make a comment, you don't want to have to go on a 20-minute rant of explaining the whole backstory. So you just like put it into this nice little sentence, and it might not be completely true. I guess. Yeah, I guess. What did you call it? An oligarchy? What was the phrase you used?
The theocratic oligarchy.
I feel like that wouldn't have worked on the wall in the airport quite as well as the world's first democracy.
Iceland was the first theocratic oligarchy.
Yeah, and then everybody's on the phone googling what the fuck's a theocratic oligarchy. So I think you just round these things up to something.
Well, yeah, I mean, but it's also because you're creating an idea of a people, right? An idea of a people that has always in some way had a destiny to control themselves, right? So, in Iceland, what happens in the Viking Age is that 415 men and a couple of women, like 11 or something like that, the 415 settlers go to Iceland, and among them are 11 women. The rest of them are men. And these are people who take land in Iceland, right? So these are people who are wealthy enough to have a ship or more ships, and can feed and uphold a crew who will go there with them, right? Beyond just their own family. And then they take a piece of land, these 415 individuals, and then they say, I own this land, but you people who came with me on this boat, you're welcome to stay on this land as tenant farmers. Okay. So that's establishing feudalism right there, right? But that's not how the contemporary Icelandic history writing has interpreted that, right? They interpret this as a will of the people kind of thing, and we're all part of the people. And so then they established this General Assembly that they, in contemporary history writing in Iceland, interpret as a democracy, right? That represents the people. But let's just keep this in mind, like the lowest estimates of Viking Age population in Iceland are like 10,000 people, with what? Only 415 actual landowners? That's a little interesting, right? That's definitely not a democracy. That's definitely not a people that possesses a nation or have their own plots of land and all that stuff. It's a lot more complicated than that. And but it looks much better when you're a modern republic to say, oh well, we were established as some kind of republic back in the Viking Age, right?
Yeah, it seems just romanticized, and
very much is.
Iceland's a good marketing tool. They know how to market themselves. They've done well on the tourism side of things, so good on them. Good on them.
And it's still a very awesome place to visit.
I mean, how many people have left Iceland saying, you know what, it's first democracy there, because they didn't have a Mathias to tell them it's a theocratic fucking olive garden something or other.
Theocratic olive garden. Oh, I love it.
All right, so before we move on from this, I think the odd thing is that I guess the word casual isn't maybe the right word, but I would consider myself in this group as well. People who get interested in this kind of culture in Nordic mythology in the Viking Age, I think if you put the countries of like the cultural Scandinavia in order, Iceland would kind of be at the top, because you kind of have this idea of it's a country founded by Vikings, and it's kind of that's where the Viking culture lived on the longest and kind of went on there, and their language is the closest to Old Norse. So I think people kind of just put that one at the top and then maybe move down, and the other three are just kind of there. But even
the other ones are just there.
but the fact is, though, when it comes to kind of the history and learning about this, there's a lot more in the Danish museum and the Norwegian museums than there is in the Icelandic ones. But I think like I say, I put myself in this, certainly when I kind of started getting into this kind of stuff, that Iceland was the holy grail, the place. Everything was there. But when I looked around the museums in Oslo compared to the museums in Reykjavik, the museums in Oslo had
a little more impressive, huh?
yeah, they had far more artifacts. And I know the one in Copenhagen is even more so.
And Sweden has a fuck ton of awesome material culture from the Viking Age and before that everybody needs to go see. So Iceland has a lot of literature romanticizing the Viking Age, both in Iceland and outside of Iceland, right? The Icelanders were busy writing about Norwegian kings or ancient heroes in Denmark and stuff like that. They loved talking about that back then, and associating with Scandinavia back then, because back then it was a power language. And it's only in more recent times that the association with Scandinavia hasn't been cultural currency in the same way, which has something to do with the fact that Iceland hasn't been an independent country for a very long time. So what Iceland has done, which is really, really impressive, right, is that it has gone from being a relatively poor nation, where the economy is based primarily off of fishing, to becoming a international hub for music and tourism as well, right? Because I mean, and this is where they are right. Their country is fucking awesome. Like, it is a great place to go. Well, it's an awesome place to visit. It has awesome nature.
That's the other thing that I was going to say. Going back to what I was saying before about kind of it being the top. Not only do you have this idea of this country made by Vikings, it's also fucking stunning. It's a beautiful country that you kind of get. You get landscape like nowhere else because the climate is so harsh.
Exactly. And what does Denmark have? Like, yeah, we have some cute beaches, but that's really it. Otherwise it's just like plowed fields and some marshes.
I just got an image of you in some speedos on a Danish cute beach.
Are you flirting with me, man?
Oh, maybe.
And so like, and it's the same, like, yeah, sure, Sweden has some lakes and shit, and some forests, but come on, guys. Norway has some pretty fjords.
Norway is beautiful as well.
Yes.
But there's something, Iceland feels, it's something magical almost. I don't know, maybe that's because I went in the winter when everything was completely frozen. I went to, is it Gus Falls, and it's all was all frozen. There's big chunks of ice going over the waterfall. It's probably the prettiest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. So it was very magical. It was.
I mean,
beautiful.
you should. What the hell are they called? The flood plains or whatever they are from Vatnajökull and Mýrdalsjökull in the southeastern part of Iceland. Stunning place, really stunning. Like if you go down to Vik and then you go onwards from there towards Vatnajökull, really beautiful and definitely something that you don't see anywhere. Like you don't just see this in a lot of other places. So Iceland definitely has special geography, special nature, and also special people.
There we go. Let's end on that. Move to the next subject whilst we on a nice note before we annoy anyone else. Let's move to Odinism, Odinist, and let's piss off. We've annoyed the left, we've annoyed Scandinavians, so now we're going to annoy the right and anybody who uses the word Odinist and Odinism, I guess. But to be honest, both these topics this week were mine, because this is one that I've seen repeatedly used over and over again. When I kind of just popping in and out of the Facebook groups, I see people all the time saying that they kind of are Odinists. they relate to being Odinism. They it's a calling. It's basically, it's their quote unquote religion. But I don't think there's any malice in it. But I don't think maybe these people understand where the term Odinist and Odinism comes from. So I think it's a very honest mistake, but it's one that hopefully maybe you can clear up, because it does have a very negative connotation of its origin and where it comes from. So hopefully there's going to be a bunch of people listening to this that call themselves Odinists. I think it's because people don't necessarily know what else to call it. What else, you call people that are into this stuff heathens, but Odinist almost sounds like its own religion. It gives it a definitive name. You believe in Odin, you're an Odinist, and it sounds quite innocent, but it's not so much. And hopefully people that have been maybe using it without knowing the real reason, or at least the real origin behind it, can then stop.
The term Odinism has a history that is intrinsically attached to the far right, and not just like people who are like far right, but we're talking about straight up Nazis and stuff like that. So if you are somebody who considers yourself an Odinist but don't associate with National Socialism and racist movements, then I would strongly encourage you to find another terminology, which does exist. There's Ausatru, as the Scandinavian Icelandic term. There's Norse paganism, which is used a lot over here in North America.
I think you'll find it's Nordic paganism, Matthias.
There's also some who call it. You have another in Scandinavia. Another term is forsider. So there are different terms for what is essentially like a Nordic version of neo-paganism in different ways. And the very deep rabbit hole starting to like explain what that is. But going back to the subject of Odinism and where does it come from? So the term Odinism, especially in English, it has its origins in one particular movement, and that is the Odinic or Odinist Fellowship, which was established by a Danish woman named Else Christensen, who left Denmark after World War II, probably because she would have gotten shot. And then she went to North America, spent time in Canada, spent time in the US, and established this group. And she died in 2005, I think. She was an anti-Semite. She was an anarcho-syndicalist. When she lived in Denmark, rumor has it that she collaborated with the Nazis. And that's why she would probably have gotten shot if she had stuck around after World War II. But yeah, so the organization that she established was an anti-Semitic organization, founded on the idea that Odin is a god of white people, and in different ways, the descendants in this organization, they have considered themselves racists or racialists and so on. Calling them Nazis is not appropriate because they don't necessarily have the same ideas about societal organization as the Nazis would have had or had.
I think nowadays a Nazi has become the overall umbrella term for
anybody over there. Yeah, but that's
anybody
really problematic,
who's a racist. And sometimes it's for people who aren't even racist. It's just I've seen people use it for just, you just don't agree with it, or maybe you're telling somebody what to do, and it's like, oh, you're right. It's so, and that really annoys me that it's become so loosely used that it kind of, in my opinion, it devalues the actual atrocities that real Nazis did. that this word just gets thrown around for fucking everything just because you don't agree on the most menial thing.
It is really problematic. But what you can say about sort of like the ideas that have been attached to this to the particularly to people who historically have identified as Odinists, definitely racist and racialist ideas. So the ideas of racial segregation in different ways, right? The idea that Odinism is for white people only, that kind of stuff. That's also how precursors to the ideology that Ilse Christensen and the people around her use, right? That was also built on racist and racialist thinking. Wotanism, as it is called in late 19th century and early 20th century Austria and Germany, right? Wotan is the German version of Odin. And ultimately, most of these ideas and thoughts go back to Guido von List, an Austrian kooky parlor magician, is what I would like to call him. So he was really influential in building up a support for a German hegemony in a very diverse Austrian kingdom at the time. The majority were Germans, or at least the biggest ethnic group was German at the time. But you also had Polish, Hungarian, Serbian, Croatians, Italians, and a lot of other people. And in that very complicated ethnic climate in the late 19th century in Austria, that's where we had the Völkisch ideas of a universal German folk blossoming, right? Which, you know, we see the Germans latching on to. This is part of the background for National Socialism in Germany later on. And attached to these ideas are also these occultist groups that are established by, among others, Guido von List, but also, you know, this students of his and people who are attached to other groups that he has some kind of influence to with. And that ultimately becomes this religion, neo-pagan religion of Wotanism, where Odin or Wotan is the god of Germanic peoples, and sort of like becomes a Germanic Christ even in some versions of all of this. And that's really what Odinism builds on. And so it is very much like very difficult to actually detach it from that racialist heritage. And I don't see any of the groups that define themselves as Odinist or Odinic, like the Odinic rite. I don't see them attempting to detach themselves from that history. To the contrary, they seem to be pretty much comfortable with it. So again, if you're somebody who considers yourself devoted to Odin or something like that, but you don't consider yourself a racialist or anything like that, I would suggest using another term. Otherwise, you might confuse people a little bit.
Well, that's it. I think I've seen people, scholarly types, I guess, that I've met through the show that I'm now friends with on Facebook. I've seen them quite often talking about how, you know, don't use the word Odinism, don't use it, you know, it's inherently a racist thing. But then I still see very much kind of, again, I don't necessarily really like to use the word casual people in like the Facebook groups who freely and openly use it. And I'm not going to be like, to link you back to the top of the show, I'm not going to jump in there and be like, you're a fucking racist, like some people might, because I genuinely don't think that some of these people understand what the term that they're using. I think that it's just, it kind of fits, it makes sense. I like Odin, Odinic sounds like that's the right thing to use, so that's what I'm going to use. And they don't kind of understand the idea of where it comes from. which why hopefully people are going to listen to this and then
change their minds.
Yeah, either
I hope
change
some
them,
Odinists who are actually racist will listen to this and change their mind.
yeah, either change their mind, or hopefully people who do listen to this then are equipped with the knowledge from yourself to be able to explain to people why it's wrong. Because it's one thing kind of going, oh, it's a racist term, but not being able to back it up. If you really want to change someone's mind and stop them using it, then you need to be able to say it was founded on racism and this is why, which is why I felt this episode, adding this topic in here was important, because then it equips, we've said this time and time again on here, we want to equip people with the knowledge to be able to hopefully either change the opinions or they're right, or change the opinions of people who are kind of Joe blogs, quote unquote, so they don't think that everything Viking is racist, because unfortunately there are some people out there who have no interest in this stuff who do think that.
Yeah, and I mean, there are also some groups out there who've done a lot of work to detach modern Nordic-based neo-paganisms of various kinds from that heritage of racism, because I mean it's you can't get around the fact that is the history in the late 19th century and early 20th century for so much of this stuff. Like, as we've also talked about before, I mean, scholarship, there's still so much valid scholarship out there that was produced by Nazis or people who in different ways have a history with the Nazi party in Germany. For instance, the best edition of the Eddic poems that you can find in the edited version, was made by people who had affiliations with the Nazi party in Germany at the time, when they were scholars back then. So that's part of our heritage in general as people who work with this field. And that's something that then it becomes incumbent upon us to detach contemporary work that we do in all these fields from that history, and be aware of it as well. I mean, like, yeah, there is a history of white supremacy, racism, National Socialism attached to working with Old Norse mythology, being spiritually involved with Old Norse mythology and so on. But that shouldn't define our future, right? That's where it's important to do your own work, so to speak, as a regular human being who lives in the 21st century and doesn't want to go back to some fucked up version of the early 20th century or whatever.
Oh, but unfortunately people don't want to do their own work, and to be honest, I can identify with that, because people are busy and they get interested in this stuff, and I probably believe wholeheartedly that if things hadn't worked out the way they are, that we did this show for 90 episodes. Hopefully we don't get cancelled after this one. But we've done I've learned so much through this that sometimes I think I need to take a second and step back and think, I've been very fortunate to be put in this position where I get, I haven't gone through university like you haven't, like a lot of our guests have. I've kind of just been lucky enough to create this podcast with you, where we sit down and speak to some really amazing people, some people who are absolute pioneers in their field, and I get to have these 2-hour conversations and learn so much firsthand. But not everyone is as lucky as I've got to be, and I probably fully think that if this hadn't have happened, I would have been kind of one of these casual type people, because I don't have the time in my everyday life to sit down and read the books, because I'm trying to run a business. I have a puppy, I have other things going on outside. So you have very much lives where you can't just sit down and read books. So you kind of learn things on the fly. You take snippets from Facebook groups and this and that, and you learn bits, but you never really truly learn, I guess. So whilst I guess I can be sometimes an asshole in Facebook groups, sometimes you have to understand that not everybody has the chance to learn everything, and you need to take a moment to hopefully try and educate people rather than just shit on them, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that, like, again, we apply hard vocabulary on this podcast too. I do, at least when we talk about racists, right? Often that's based on the assumption that those who are racists, they are very conscious about it, but that's not always the case. Keep also that in mind, like that, like, you know, I don't know how you find yourself, you're in a racist group, or how you go down that path, so to speak. But my assumption is that, you know, we're all humans in this world trying to figure shit out, right? And that also means that we have the capacity, as we were talking about before, we have the capacity to change our perspectives, learn from mistakes, and then move on to being, you know, happier people in this world, right? That's what I really hope for anybody who exists on this planet, that they will progress through life, becoming increasingly more and more happy, you know. And I assume that if you're caught up in hating other people, it's because you're not happy.
Yeah, I
So
think
yeah.
you also have to assume that people have the self-awareness to understand that maybe their opinions are racist, because I think a lot of people have opinions and they don't consider them to be racist. You know, we've had people who listen to this podcast. We've had messages of people say, you know, thank you for the episodes you do. We've listened, you know, listening to it has made me change my opinion on certain stuffs, and I was maybe thinking a certain way, and I now have changed direction, which is wonderful to hear. But I, you know, I used to work on building sites, and the amount of times that I heard, because Huddersfield is very much a multicultural town. You have a lot of kind of Middle Eastern, Asian people, and the amount of time that I've been on a building site, people have said, "I'm not racist, but I don't like Asian people or Middle Eastern people," or probably they use the P word, but
Mm.
very much it's that idea of I'm not racist, but I just don't like this one group, and I'm justified for not liking this one group because they do a certain thing that I don't like. But in their own mind, they're like, I'm not racist. But yeah, you fucking are. So
Yeah.
it's also that you assume people have that self-awareness of what they think is actually wrong.
Yeah.
So they
No,
until
it's
until maybe they hear it or somebody challenges them and says, look, that you that is racist. That's not a racist opinion. That's so, but you see so many times people use that I'm not racist, but, and if
you
there's
know
ever a
what?
but after that sentence, then you probably
Yeah,
are.
this is really interesting, right? Because you know, in Denmark, what I often heard back when I was younger were people saying, I'm not a racist. In fact, I quite like Black people, but I can't stand people from X Middle Eastern country or
Yeah.
something like that. You know, I can't stand people from Turkey or whatever. And it's always like, dude, you do know that that is racist.
Yeah.
And you're not absolved for saying that you like one group of people who don't have the same skin color as you, but you hate another one who don't have the same skin color or hair color or cultural background or language or whatever, right? Like anytime you talk about other people in that way, then you're being kind of racist, man. Like that's just it. And
It's just insane to even be, I don't like this whole group of people. Like, I'm gonna judge my opinions based on maybe a few people from this whole area and be like, yeah, made my mind up, don't like any of them. Like, what?
yeah,
How does that
no, it's
work?
it it doesn't, right?
No, I, to be fair, we I think we're closing an hour and a half, and I have a little bit of a funny story that I just thought of thought back then. So going back to kind of people using the word Odinist and Odinic, and not understanding the meaning of it. And it reminded me of a friend of mine. Like, do they use the word nonce in America? In the US, is that a word over there? Okay, so
for what?
so like a nonce in the UK is somebody who is it's a pedophile.
Oh,
That's like a shorthand word for what a nonce is. And I have a friend who, when he was like 12, just thought the word nonce was like a nice word that you call people. Oh, not like a nice word, like a jesting kind of, like a, in like a friendly banter type word.
all right.
And this guy, you used to call his teacher it as like a nice, and he was like 12 years old. He's like, he used to call his teacher it as a kind of pleasantry or like a joking way. And it wasn't until he was maybe 20 years old he realized that he'd been using this word completely wrong his whole life, and it actually meant something really bad. And he'd been calling his teacher but it's a bad thing to be called for anybody, but it's particularly bad to call your teacher it when you're a 12-year-old fucking boy. And it was just this whole idea of using words that you don't really understand the meaning of and haven't taken the time to look up. And it couldn't help but just think of this story, that because when he told me about it, I couldn't help but laugh. And it's kind of sad because that teacher must have gone home like, fuck, what do I do here? But it just made me think, like, but people do get confused, but also people do get confused about things. He was completely innocent in the situation. He's a 12-year-old kid. He doesn't know any better. He's picked a word up from somewhere and gone, oh, this sounds funny. So it does happen. People just kind of pick stuff up on their travels and don't maybe quite understand. You don't have to attack them. You can just kind of politely maybe say, don't call yourself an Odinist, or don't go around calling your teacher a nonce.
Yes.
And that's the episode, I think.
I think that's the episode.
I think we've I don't think we've upset too many people. We are who we are by this point. We've done 90 episodes. I think we rounded up quite nicely at the end. Just be nice to people. And I think that goes from whether you're left leaning, right leaning, far left, far right. Just yes, you can fuck off. But but no, like everybody just I was thinking this earlier, that I guess our catchphrase on our Facebook group, we have the questions to enter the Facebook group. You have one of the questions to enter it is, what's the catchphrase of the podcast? We try to make sure people have at least listened to a couple of episodes, and it's surprising the amount of people who actually just put "don't be a dick." Was I guess our official catchphrase would be, it's complicated, but I think that is also just a good lesson for life of just don't be a dick, man. Just try to be nice to people.
Yeah, no, I have that hanging on the fridge, actually. A sticker that says "Don't be a dick."
There you go. But it's if you follow that, I don't think you're going to go far wrong. And that's where whichever way you think politically or whatever, just be nice to people, and everyone can get on.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Our next t-shirt, in runes. Don't be a dick in runes.
Don't be a dick.
We've got it. There you go. You're gonna have to start translating it.
And go fuck yourself.
Oh god. Fuck or just fuck everybody. But it's in runes, so nobody knows what it means, so it's all right. All right, let's wrap this one up. Mathias, where can people find you?
Oh man, I'm getting sick of social media in general now. So, but I'm still on Instagram for now. Maybe I'll disappear entirely at some point from any social media.
Oh, is that because everybody started following you when I went through that spell of telling everybody to add you as a friend? For like 5 episodes in a row, it was just like, add Mathias as a friend.
No, it's more because I genuinely don't think social media is that healthy for human beings.
No.
Yeah.
No, I think hopefully as we go forward in in the world, we will kind of maybe understand it a little bit more. It's still very much a new thing.
Yeah.
We'll get there, and you'll be back with a vengeance. All right. If you enjoy the show, please leave a 5-star rating and a positive review. If you didn't like this episode, don't leave a rating, I guess. You can watch clips of the show. You can watch episodes on our YouTube channel. It's just Nordic Mythology Podcast. Same for Instagram, Facebook, just Nordic Mythology Podcast. And if you want to support us a little bit further, Patreon is a brilliant way. We have a bunch of different tiers. You get a free episode every week. And you either get the Vikings watch along show where me and Mathias sit down and watch an episode of Vikings and we let you know our thoughts, or you get the storytime episode where Jonas Lorentzen comes in and narrates a part of a saga for us, and they are thoroughly really good episodes. They are hilarious, and they are honestly worth a subscription fee alone. You know, you get a bunch of other things from the Patreon, but that just having that story time episode, you get the backlog of the ones we've already done as well. But just those episodes on their own are definitely worth the price. I cannot stress how funny Jonas Lorentzen is off the cuff as well. He's got a different voice for every character, but he also just acts them out. It is really brilliant.
It really is. I love him. Those episodes are so fun.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you for listening. If you've made it this far, I guess we haven't upset your particular group, but maybe next week you'll be the ones we're after.